Get out of here now. CEO Thomas Barnes's voice echoed in the large conference room, his sharp command freezing everyone in their seats. The team shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting around, waiting for Maria, the janitor, to comply. Maria stood by the door, a woman of few words but immense presence, her posture unwavering. She had been called to clean up the room after yet another high-stakes meeting, a task she had done 1,000 times before without complaint. But today was different. Today, Thomas had decided that her presence in the room wasn't welcome. He didn't know her story. He didn't know that Maria Williams wasn't just any janitor. Her life was a story of resilience, of quiet strength, of a mind far sharper than most realized. I said leave. Thomas's words cut through the tension. Maria's eyes, dark yet calm, met his. She said nothing but moved slowly toward the door. The rest of the room watched her, some in silent judgment, others in awkward discomfort. As she reached the door, the CEO looked at the group and motioned for her to step aside. "You're dismissed," he added, as though she was nothing more than a shadow in the room. But then, just as Maria reached for the handle, the door opened. A new figure entered the room, Chairman David Johnson, tall and confident, with a presence that commanded the space. His eyes immediately found Maria, and a smile spread across his face. "Maria," he said warmly, walking towards her. The room was silent, all attention now on the unexpected turn of events. Thomas froze in his spot, his mouth agape, his expression faltering. David reached out, shaking Maria's hand, and the energy in the room shifted instantly. "It's so good to see you again, Maria," David said. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to introduce you to the team. We've been waiting for you." Thomas's shock was palpable. His arrogance had clouded his judgment, and he had underestimated the woman he had just dismissed so callously. The others in the room exchanged uncertain glances, trying to understand what was happening. "Wait, you know her?" one of the executives finally asked, clearly confused. David's smile widened as he turned to face them. "Of course. Maria has been a part of this company from the very beginning. She's an essential part of our team. In fact, I've been meaning to make her an offer. Maria, I'd like you to consider joining the board of directors." The room fell into stunned silence. Thomas stood frozen, the realization hitting him hard. The woman he had so thoughtlessly dismissed wasn't just a janitor. She was someone whose presence carried far more weight than he ever imagined. Thomas's mouth was dry, his mind racing. How could he have been so blind? Maria wasn't just a cleaner. She was the one who had seen the truth all along, and now, it seemed, the truth was catching up with him. As Maria stood there, the weight of David's words hung in the air. The room was still, too still, as if everyone was waiting for her to react. Thomas's face was a mix of disbelief and growing frustration. He had never imagined that the woman he had dismissed so easily would turn out to be someone so connected, so important. The executives exchanged awkward glances, unsure of how to respond to the sudden shift in power dynamics. Maria felt the eyes of the room on her, but she remained calm, composed, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, David," she said softly, her voice steady. "I'm honored by your offer, but there's something you all need to understand." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I've been here for years, working quietly behind the scenes, but I've always been underestimated. And that's fine. I've learned to work through it. But I'm not here for sympathy or praise." The room remained silent, all ears on her. "I'm here because I've been doing more than just cleaning this building. I've been watching, listening, learning, and now, it's my turn to make a difference." Thomas, still in shock, opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. He was frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. Maria turned her gaze to him, her eyes calm but firm. "I'm not just a janitor. I've seen every corner of this company, every secret that's been hidden. And I know more about how this place runs than you think." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain control of the room. "This is absurd," he muttered. But his voice lacked the authority it once had. Maria smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "The truth is, you're not in charge here, Thomas. You never were." The room seemed to shrink around Thomas as Maria's words settled in. David watched quietly, his expression unreadable. "You may have the power here, Thomas," Maria continued, "but power doesn't always mean control." The tension was palpable, the shift in the atmosphere undeniable. The executives were no longer looking at Thomas for answers. They were looking at Maria, waiting for her to take the lead. Maria's mind was already racing with plans, with ideas on how she would reshape things. The quiet janitor, now more than just a face in the background, was ready to make her move. "I've been offered a place at the table, Thomas," she said, her voice firm. "And trust me, when I sit there, I won't be letting people like you push me around anymore." Thomas took a step back, his face pale, as if he had just realized that his control was slipping away. Maria turned to the other executives, her gaze unwavering. "This company needs a new direction, one where everyone is seen, not just the ones in power. And I'm here to make that happen." As she finished speaking, the silence in the room was broken only by the sound of her footsteps as she turned to leave. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving a room full of people who would never look at her the same way again. Days passed after that fateful meeting, but the air at the office felt different. There was an unspoken tension in every corner of the building, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Maria had left the meeting room with her head high, but the ripple effect of her words lingered in the hallways. The executives now viewed her with a mix of curiosity and respect, their prior dismissal replaced by cautious admiration. They had seen her before, just another janitor in the corner, cleaning up after them. But now, they realized they had been blind to her potential, to the quiet power she held. Meanwhile, Thomas Barnes, still reeling from the shock, couldn't shake off the image of Maria's calm demeanor, her unwavering certainty in the face of his dismissal. He had always prided himself on being in control, but now, for the first time, he felt vulnerable, unsure of his position. He could no longer ignore the nagging question: who was Maria really? What did she know? And why had she been hiding in plain sight for so long? Maria's life was anything but ordinary. She had grown up in the shadows, in places most people never thought to look. She had been underestimated for most of her life, both for her background and her appearance. But what they didn't know was that Maria had been quietly watching, listening, and learning from the sidelines. She wasn't just cleaning floors. She was observing the way people worked, the way power shifted, and the way business was conducted behind closed doors. The whispers of corruption, the secrets traded in hushed tones, and the promises made only to be broken. Maria had seen it all. But she kept her silence, waiting for the right moment, for the moment when everything would change. And that moment had come. As she walked through the halls of the building, Maria could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her. The whispers had started, but she didn't mind. In fact, she welcomed them. The time for hiding was over. She had made her move, and now it was her turn to shape the future of the company. But it wasn't just about power, it was about justice. Maria wanted to create a space where everyone, no matter their background, could rise to the top. A place where people were valued for their talents, not their titles. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she had never been one to shy away from a challenge. As she approached the elevator, she was greeted by one of the executives, a woman who had been one of the first to look at her differently. "Maria, can I talk to you for a moment?" the woman asked. Maria nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Of course," she replied. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said in the meeting the other day, and I just wanted to say you were right. Things need to change around here." Maria's smile widened, but she said nothing. She knew this was only the beginning. The game was just starting, and Maria was ready to take her seat at the table. The following week, Maria found herself standing in a conference room, this time not as an outsider, but as an integral part of the team. The atmosphere had shifted, and now the executives who once barely acknowledged her were all seated around the table, waiting for her to speak. The respect that had been absent before was now tangible in the air. It was strange, almost surreal. But Maria felt no different. She was still the same person, quiet, observant, and driven by the need to make things right. The conference room had a cold, sterile feel, the walls lined with sleek glass and polished wood. Maria's gaze flickered to the heads of the room. David, who had stood by her from the start, and Thomas, whose discomfort was barely masked as he shifted in his seat. He no longer had the confidence he once had. The past week had shaken him to his core, and Maria could see it in the way he avoided eye contact. The first few minutes of the meeting were filled with the usual formalities, numbers, projections, and business updates. But Maria wasn't here for that. She was here to address the real issues. As the discussion moved to a new set of initiatives, Maria spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "We need to rethink our approach to leadership," she said, her words cutting through the noise. Everyone in the room turned their attention to her. For too long, this company has been driven by a handful of people at the top, making decisions without considering the people who actually do the work. "I've seen it firsthand, and it's time we change that." Thomas's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. Maria continued, her tone unwavering. "We need a leadership that reflects the diversity of the company, one that values every employee, not just those in suits and offices. We need to create a space where everyone's voice is heard, from the janitor to the CEO." The room was silent. Maria could feel the weight of their stares, some uncomfortable, some calculating. David was the first to speak. "I agree," he said, his voice steady. "It's time for a change. Maria, I think you're right. We need a more inclusive leadership model." For the first time, Maria felt like she was truly being listened to. The tension in the room began to dissolve as the executives began to nod in agreement. Maria felt a wave of satisfaction, but she knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much to do, so many challenges ahead. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was in control of her destiny. As the meeting continued, Maria took a seat at the head of the table, not as a janitor, but as someone with real influence, someone who had earned her place. Thomas, on the other hand, had not spoken since her declaration. He sat back in his chair, arms crossed, looking at her with a mix of resentment and begrudging respect. Maria didn't need his approval. She was here to make sure the changes she envisioned would happen, and no one, not even Thomas, could stop her now. As the meeting drew to a close, David gave her a nod. "Maria, we'll set up a meeting next week to discuss these changes further. You've made an impact." Maria smiled, a smile of quiet triumph. She had made her mark, and the journey was only just beginning. The following month, Maria sat in her new office, the one she had dreamed about but never thought she would actually have. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and a large desk stood in front of a window that looked out over the city skyline. She had been given a team to manage, a budget to oversee, and, most importantly, the power to make real changes. Yet, as the weight of her new responsibilities settled in, she couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. She wasn't just the janitor anymore. She was a leader in a company she had once cleaned for. Thomas had kept his distance, still licking his wounds from the shift in power, but the others in the company had started to see her differently. They no longer whispered when she walked down the halls. They greeted her with respect. Even the ones who had once dismissed her were now seeking her opinion, asking for her advice. But Maria wasn't here for accolades or recognition. She was here for something bigger. She wanted to build a company that was fair, that didn't just serve the wealthy and powerful, but also valued the voices of those who had been overlooked for so long. She had a vision, and with her position, she could make it happen. She had started meeting with department heads, hearing their concerns, and reviewing policies. She quickly realized that the company had been operating with a narrow focus, ignoring the people at the bottom, the ones who actually kept the company running. It was time to change that. Maria began implementing new policies that encouraged diversity, fostered inclusivity, and ensured that every employee had an equal chance to succeed. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was prepared for the challenges. As she walked into the conference room for her first meeting with the board since her promotion, she felt a surge of determination. The room was filled with familiar faces, but this time, they were looking at her with anticipation. Thomas was sitting at the far end of the table, his face carefully neutral. Maria took her seat at the head of the table, a place she had once only dreamed of. "I know this company has faced challenges in the past, but I believe we can do better," Maria began, her voice steady and confident. "We can build a workplace where everyone is valued, no matter their position. It's time we stop treating people like they're invisible." She glanced at Thomas, whose eyes were fixed on her with a mixture of frustration and begrudging respect. He didn't speak, but his silence said everything. "We need to invest in our people," Maria continued. "From the janitors to the executives, everyone deserves an opportunity to grow and succeed. We need to give them the tools, the support, and the respect they need to thrive." The room was quiet as the board members absorbed her words. They had expected resistance, but instead, they were met with a vision that was bold, but necessary. It was clear that Maria wasn't going to back down. This was her moment, and she was going to use it to bring about the change she had always known was possible. As the meeting came to a close, David nodded at her, his approval clear. "Maria, I'm glad you're in charge now," he said with a smile. "You've got the right mindset to lead this company into the future." Maria smiled back, but inside, she knew the hardest work was still ahead. But she was ready. She had the power now, and she wasn't about to let it go to waste. The company began to change, slowly at first, but the momentum was undeniable. Maria had a vision, and every day, she took steps to make it a reality. The people who had once worked in the shadows, their voices unheard, were now being invited to contribute. Maria knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but she could see the first signs of transformation. Department heads started to listen to their teams, and employees who had once felt invisible began to speak up. The culture of the company shifted, becoming more open, more inclusive, and more supportive. But not everyone was on board. Thomas still held on to the old ways, reluctant to let go of his grip on power. He had been forced to acknowledge Maria's position, but that didn't mean he accepted it. He still questioned her decisions, still tried to steer conversations back to the status quo. But Maria wasn't backing down. She had earned her place at the table, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her. One afternoon, as Maria sat at her desk reviewing some reports, her phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "We need to talk. Can you meet me in the conference room in an hour?" Maria didn't hesitate. She had learned to trust David, and she knew this meeting was important. When she entered the conference room, David was already there, looking pensive. "What's going on?" Maria asked as she sat down. David looked at her, his face serious. "There are still some people in the company who are resisting the changes you're pushing for. They're not happy with the direction things are going." Maria listened carefully, her mind racing. She knew this wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't expected this kind of resistance so soon. "Who's leading the resistance?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Thomas and a few others," David replied. "They're trying to convince some of the board members that the changes are too radical, that it'll hurt the company in the long run." Maria took a deep breath. She knew Thomas wouldn't let go easily, but she wasn't going to let him stand in her way. "What do we do?" she asked. David's gaze softened. "We need to make sure the board knows what's at stake here. If we let this resistance go unchecked, we could lose everything we've worked for. You need to make a strong case for your vision." Maria nodded. "I'm ready," she said. And with that, they began to prepare for the upcoming board meeting, a meeting that would determine the future of the company. Maria knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined. She had fought hard to get to this point, and she wasn't about to let Thomas or anyone else derail her progress. She would make her case. She would show them that the future she envisioned for the company was one worth fighting for. The day of the board meeting arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. Maria walked into the conference room, her heart steady but her mind racing. She knew that this meeting would be pivotal, that it would decide not just the future of the company, but her own place within it. The long table was lined with faces, some familiar, some cold. At the far end of the table, Thomas sat, his eyes locked on her as she made her way to the seat at the head of the table. It was a small victory, one that had taken years of hard work and determination to achieve. As Maria settled into her chair, she glanced around the room, taking in the silent tension. The board members had already begun whispering among themselves, clearly unsettled by the upcoming discussion. But Maria wasn't intimidated. She had spent her entire life proving people wrong, and she wasn't about to stop now. David was sitting beside her, his expression calm but resolute. "Are we ready?" Maria asked, her voice even. David nodded. "We've got this. Just stay focused." Maria took a deep breath and turned her attention to the room. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice strong and clear. "I know there's been a lot of concern about the changes I've proposed. Some of you have doubts, and I understand that. Change is never easy, but it's necessary." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "We've been stuck in the past for too long. The world is changing, and we need to change with it. If we want to remain competitive, if we want to thrive in this new landscape, we need to adapt. That means creating a more inclusive, diverse, and supportive environment for everyone, from the lowest levels to the highest." She looked directly at Thomas, his face a mask of skepticism. "I know some of you think that these changes will weaken the company, that we'll lose our edge. But I disagree. I believe that by valuing everyone equally, we can unlock a potential that's been lying dormant for too long. I believe we can create a company where people aren't just here to work. They're here to grow, to innovate, and to make a difference." The room fell silent as Maria's words hung in the air. It was clear that some of the board members were still unsure, but there was a flicker of doubt in their eyes. Maria could feel the shift happening, could sense that the momentum was on her side. Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but Maria raised a hand, silencing him. "I know you have objections, Thomas," she said, her tone calm but firm. "But I've been listening. I've been watching. And I believe the time for change is now. We don't have to keep doing things the way we've always done them. We can create something better, something stronger, together." There was a long pause before one of the board members, a woman named Linda, spoke up. "Maria's right," she said, her voice steady. "I've seen the difference she's already made in this company. It's not just talk. It's action. I think it's time we give her the chance to prove it on a bigger scale." The room erupted into murmurs, and Maria could feel the tide turning in her favor. One by one, more board members voiced their support, their doubts melting away as they saw the truth in her words. When the vote was finally called, Maria was certain of the outcome. The change she had fought for, the vision she had so desperately wanted to bring to life, was finally within reach. As the meeting adjourned, Maria stood up, her heart full. She had done it. The company was hers now, hers to shape, hers to lead. And for the first time, she felt truly free. As the weeks passed, the company began to transform under Maria's leadership. The changes were not just superficial. They were deep, rooted in a new culture of inclusivity, respect, and opportunity. Employees who had once felt invisible now had a voice, and Maria was there to ensure it was heard. She worked tirelessly, meeting with department heads, listening to feedback, and implementing new policies that would allow people to thrive regardless of their position. Thomas, on the other hand, remained distant, a shadow of the man he once was. He still clung to old ways, believing that the company's success was tied to the established hierarchy, to the people who controlled the power. But with each passing day, Maria's vision became clearer, and the resistance from Thomas and others grew weaker. One afternoon, Maria walked into her office, her mind full of ideas. She had just returned from a meeting with a group of employees from the lower levels of the company. They had shared their concerns, their frustrations, and their hopes for the future. Maria knew she had to act quickly if she wanted to continue the momentum she had started. As she sat down at her desk, her phone rang. It was David. "Maria, I think it's time," he said, his voice urgent. "The board is ready to meet. They want to discuss the future of the company, and they're looking to you for leadership." Maria felt a surge of excitement and anxiety. This was it, the moment she had worked so hard for. She stood up, straightened her shoulders, and walked out of her office. She knew what was at stake. The meeting was tense. The room was filled with board members, all of them looking to her for guidance. Thomas sat at the end of the table, his arms crossed, his expression guarded. Maria took a deep breath and began. "We've come a long way," she said, her voice steady and confident. "But this is just the beginning. The changes we've made have been a start, but now we need to take it to the next level. We need to invest in our people more than ever before." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "It's time we focus on our community, not just our profits. We need to support the families, the neighborhoods, the employees who have been with us for years. We need to give back, and we need to do it in a way that reflects the values we claim to uphold." Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but Maria held up her hand, signaling for him to wait. "I know you may not agree with everything I've said, Thomas," she continued, her gaze never leaving his. "But this is about more than just you and me. This is about the future of this company and the future of the people who make it work." The room was silent as the board members absorbed her words. David looked at her with approval, his eyes filled with pride. Slowly, one by one, the board members nodded. They were starting to see the vision she had been fighting for. After a long silence, the chairman spoke up. "Maria, you've proven yourself. You've made a real impact. We're ready to follow your lead." The words hit Maria like a wave of relief. She had done it. She had earned their trust, their respect. And for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. As the meeting concluded and the board members began to file out of the room, Maria stayed behind. She looked around at the empty chairs. The room that had once felt so foreign to her now felt like a place she had earned. She had come a long way from being the janitor, but this journey was far from over. She was just getting started. As the months passed, Maria's vision continued to shape the company into something new, something better. The initiatives she put in place were thriving, and the employees who had once felt overlooked were now empowered, working harder than ever to contribute to the success of the business. The culture had shifted, and the change was palpable. People were happier, more engaged, and the company was flourishing in ways it never had before. The board members who had once been skeptical now looked to Maria for guidance, and she didn't disappoint. Her leadership was steady, and her confidence was undeniable. Yet, despite the success, Maria never lost sight of the values that had driven her from the beginning. She wasn't in this for the accolades or the praise. She was in it to make a difference. As she sat at her desk one afternoon, reviewing a new proposal, her phone rang. It was David. "Maria, are you free for a quick chat?" he asked. "Of course," she replied, wondering what the conversation might be about. David sounded more serious than usual when he spoke again. "I just wanted to let you know, there's been some pushback on your latest initiative. Some of the old guard aren't happy with the pace of change." Maria felt a familiar, sinking feeling in her stomach. She had expected resistance. It had come with the territory, but it still stung to know that some people were still clinging to the past. "Who's behind it?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Thomas," David said, his tone blunt. "He's been quietly meeting with some of the board members, trying to convince them that your way isn't the right way." Maria took a deep breath, pushing aside the frustration that bubbled up inside her. Thomas had always been a force to be reckoned with, but this was different. She was different. "We need to stay focused," Maria said calmly. "This company has already changed in ways that can't be undone. No one, not even Thomas, can take that away from us." David was silent for a moment, then replied, "You're right. But I thought you should know. We'll be backing you, as always." Maria smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thank you, David. I won't let them derail everything we've built." She hung up the phone, her resolve strengthened. Thomas's resistance didn't faze her. In fact, it only made her more determined. The path ahead was clear. The company had come so far, and she was not about to let a few dissenting voices undo the progress